I can't believe I'm writing this. In just 2 weeks, I'm supposed to be marrying Sarah, the woman I thought I knew inside and out. But now, everything's falling apart. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I have to get this off my chest, because right now, I'm staring at the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah, 28, and I, 34, have known each other for 6 years. We've been engaged for 1, and our wedding is just around the corner. But tonight, something happened that completely shook me to my core, and I'm terrified. What I saw, what I heard, it's making me question everything. Here's what happened. Tonight, Sarah and I were having a rare moment of relaxation at home. She was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, while I was out back working on a project, a pagoda fire pit for our backyard. We live in Anchorage, and we were planning on using it this fall. Anyway, as I worked, I got thirsty and went inside to grab a drink. That's when I saw Sarah at the counter, talking on speakerphone with someone. The voice? It was my brother-in-law, Marty. Now, here's where my mind starts to spin. Marty asked Sarah where his wife, Evelyn, is. Evelyn, his wife of 5 years. Apparently, she's not answering her texts, and Marty's trying to reach her. Sarah tells him, she just left here. She should be home in half an hour. Wait, what? Evelyn wasn't even here. The last time we saw her was yesterday when she came over to help Sarah with some wedding decorations. So I asked Sarah, what's going on? Why are you texting Evelyn? And she says, I'm just texting Evie to let her know Marty's looking for her. But wait, how can Sarah be texting Evelyn if Marty just said she wasn't answering her texts? That's strange, right? And then, Sarah tells Marty that Evelyn will be home in 30 minutes. But why would Sarah say that unless she knows where Evelyn is, or worse, she's lying to Marty and texting Evelyn to tell her to hurry up and get home? I couldn't make sense of it, but the only conclusion I could come to was that Sarah was lying to Marty. She was covering for her sister's whereabouts, and most likely helping her sister keep this affair a secret. What was going on? Why was Sarah involved in this? I spent the next few hours trying to come up with an explanation. Some of them made sense, others were downright awful. I wanted to confront Sarah, but I knew, deep down, that if my suspicions were true, she'd never tell me the truth. And I couldn't live with that. Then, around 1 a.m., I woke up to use the bathroom. I couldn't resist the urge. I grabbed Sarah's phone, unlocked it with our shared PIN, and scrolled. I found exactly what I feared. Sarah had been helping Evelyn cover up a 6-month-long affair with a coworker. There were hundreds of texts between them, disgusting texts. Conversations about the affair, about the coworker, about intimate details that made my stomach churn. I couldn't believe my eyes. There I was, about to marry this woman, who, for the past 6 months, had been lying to me, covering for her sister's betrayal. And I had no idea. My heart sank. How could I not have seen this? How could I have been so blind? I took screenshots of everything I could, and put the phone back. Then, I retreated to my office, typing this out on Reddit just to keep from screaming. I am completely, utterly screwed. I can't marry Sarah. There's no way. But here's the problem, our wedding is in 2 weeks. Our families have spent a small fortune on this. What do I do? How do I undo all of this? How did I get it so wrong? Sarah is beautiful, fun, and kind. I thought we had a bright future. But now, everything's tainted, and I can't see her the same way anymore. It feels like a black stain on an otherwise perfect picture. I don't know how I got here. I don't know how to deal with it. I need help. But right now, I'm just trying to work up the nerve to face this. I'm not backing down, but I don't know where to go from here. The pressure is crushing. I feel sick thinking about the fallout. I feel like I'm going to vomit. But there's no way I can marry her. The wedding is off. I just don't know what to do next. It's 5 a.m. now, and I haven't slept. I've been running on caffeine and adrenaline. I have work in a few hours, but I'm avoiding Sarah right now. I just need to keep moving, keep myself distracted. I had to break the news to my brother today. He lives in Australia, so I called him after putting his kids to bed. He was incredible, didn't even mention the money he'd spent on flights. He just had my back. He pointed out something I hadn't realized. I work in a job full of liars and scammers. So why would I want to be with someone who's been lying to me for months? He's right. I'm trying to rebook the honeymoon. I can't go to Florida with Sarah, obviously, but I can go with my sister and her family instead. I'm reworking everything, trying to salvage what's left. I'm even dealing with the finances. Thankfully, the mortgage is in my name, but I'll have to figure out how to handle Sarah's contribution. It's all overwhelming. But I'm taking it one step at a time. I'm telling Marty everything. He deserves to know. I'm going to help him however I can. But I can't do this anymore. Sarah's affair is a betrayal of everything I thought we had. And now, with just 2 weeks until our wedding, I'm facing the hard truth. I can't marry her. But I have to figure out how to handle the fallout, and fast. It's 8:30 p.m. right now, and I'm sitting at my buddy Mark's house, typing away, trying to make sense of everything that's unfolded today. I'm planning to report back later, hopefully with less trauma than I'm bracing for. If I'm being honest, I'm not even sure how long a Reddit post can be. This is my first time writing one of this length, and I'm hoping it goes through. I'm exhausted, but I'm pushing through. As I said before, I work as a field analyst in the SIU department of an insurance company. Essentially, I'm a private investigator, digging into suspected fraudulent claims. It's a pretty gritty job. So here's what happened. Marty, a guy I've known for a while, asked me to help him figure out who Evelyn, his wife, was cheating on him with. All we had was a name. Let's call him Jake. I know, right? Sounds like a bad romance novel. My first step wasn't anything fancy, no high-tech gadgets or elaborate setups. I just searched LinkedIn, hoping to find Jake through Evelyn's connections. But nothing came up. Strange, right? I thought it was odd, especially since Marty mentioned Evelyn was supposed to go out for drinks tonight. That was around 9 or 10. He didn't need to say more. I knew exactly what he suspected. I offered to help, but I told him he needed to come with me. I texted Mark, explained the situation, and he agreed to meet us later. First, we drove over to Marty's parents' house. They were going to watch their granddaughter, and I just had to sit in the car and wait. I had no idea what Marty told them. After that, we drove to Evelyn's workplace, a strip mall with a bunch of generic office spaces and a massive, non-gated parking lot. We drove around, and after a while, we found her car. Marty used the spare key to unlock it, and I handed him a voice-activated recorder and a GPS tracker to place in the car. Mission complete. We parked down the street to wait. 20 minutes later, Mark shows up, slides into the car, and we wait for Evelyn. An hour after that, she walks out of the office, hand in hand with a tall, younger man. And I'm thinking, damn, Evelyn, you're making this easy. I snapped a few pictures. Then I watched her leave, following her until she parked outside a bar and grill. Not what I expected, but I was on it. I parked a block away and outlined the plan to Mark. Mark went in first. His job, get compromising photos of Evelyn and Jake and act as my alibi. Marty and I stayed in the car, waiting. Not long after, I get my first text from Mark, a couple of pictures of Evelyn and Jake kissing. In front of two of their coworkers. Yep, Marty's suspicions were spot on. But it gets worse. One of those coworkers is married, and she and her husband are close friends with Marty and Evelyn. I asked Marty if he wanted to know more. He was desperate, begging me to dig deeper. I didn't want to, but he was insistent, so I gave in. I entered the bar. Evelyn and her crew were laughing and drinking at a table by the window. I walked in, pretending to be surprised, and called out, "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" She froze, clearly caught off guard. She introduced me as her sister's fiancé, saying we were getting married in 2 weeks. Everyone congratulated me, and I stuck out my hand to the blonde guy. I expected him to introduce himself as Jake, but he didn't. His name wasn't Jake at all. I'm stunned for a second, but I quickly play it off. I introduce myself, talk to everyone else, and then step aside. I waved to Mark, told him the guy's name, and we got to work. It didn't take long. The guy had social media profiles and, wait for it, court case judgments against him. The puzzle pieces clicked. Jake was his middle name. Turns out, this guy is 26, married, and has a 1-year-old daughter. What a mess. I text Marty the guy's name, and then I just sit there, playing the role of the unwanted guest at this horrible dinner party. I let it drag on for about 10 minutes, watching as Evelyn's group got more uncomfortable with my presence. It was exactly what I wanted. Then, I texted Marty to have him tell Evelyn that he was staying at his parents' house with their daughter. Not long after, I see Evelyn showing Jake something on her phone. Then they all stand up, ready to leave. Evelyn comes over, says goodnight, and invites me and Sarah to dinner. Dinner? After all this? I just smile, pretending everything's fine, and wish them a good night. We waited for them to leave, paid the bill, and rushed back to Marty's house. We didn't know for sure what Evelyn was planning, but I half expected her to book a hotel. But no, she went home. We followed her, staying out of sight, and parked down the street. Soon, another car pulled up to Marty's house. It was Jake. He knocked, and Evelyn let him in. It's about 7:30 now, and I had my own life to deal with. I'd done what I could for Marty, and now I was ready to step back. I texted him, and he said he was heading to his parents' house for real this time. I was about to leave when I got one last message from Marty. It was done. I had one final task, head home and tell Sarah the wedding was off. I knew it was going to be bad. There was no way it wouldn't be. But I couldn't marry her after what I'd just seen. When I walked in, I found her comforting Evelyn on the couch. The whole situation unraveled in front of my eyes. Words were exchanged, emotions ran high, and yes, the cops were called. I spent the night collapsed on the couch, sleeping like a zombie. The next morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop, texts, missed calls, the whole deal. But all I could think about was how everything had flipped upside down. It was like living in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I haven't even figured out what comes next. As for Marty, well, he's on his own now. I've done all I can. I'm no longer part of this drama. What happens next is up to him. I've got enough of my own mess to sort out. And to anyone who thinks they know the whole story, trust me, you don't. I've seen everything. I know how Evelyn felt, how Sarah played along. But I'm not sharing all the ugly details. Not yet. Maybe someday. But for now, it's time to face the reality that my life is in pieces, and I'm the only one left to pick them up. Stay tuned. This isn't over yet. I had already made up my mind to move on, but as I entered that room, the weight of everything hit me. The clock was ticking in the back of my head, counting down to moments I could never get back. Friends to notify, wedding preparations to cancel, everything was slipping away. I glanced up, both Sarah and Evelyn looking at me, but there was no storm of accusations like I'd expected. No words came, just silence. I raised my eyebrows, questioning the sudden calm. But then, just like that, the moment passed. Evelyn returned to her tears, Sarah resumed comforting her, and I was left standing there, feeling awkward, uncertain of how to break the tension. It seemed like Marty hadn't mentioned my involvement in uncovering Evelyn's affair, and part of me was curious to see how Sarah would react if I acted clueless about it. So, I did. I took a seat, placed my laptop bag down with exaggerated care, pulled out my phone as if I was distracted, and casually asked, "So, what's going on?" Evelyn kept sobbing, but Sarah, she looked at me and said, "Marty is divorcing Evie." Well, that was no surprise to me. But I pushed ahead with the obvious question, what for? The air shifted. Sarah stopped rubbing Evelyn's back for just a second, her face contorting like a child being told to finish their broccoli. That moment, the tension, the awkwardness, hung between us like a thick fog. Evelyn shot Sarah a look that didn't need to be said out loud. I could feel the pause. The weight of it was crushing. Finally, Sarah blurted out, she cheated on him. I have to admit, that hit me like a slap in the face. That wasn't what I expected at all. Sure, maybe some of you reading this might think, well, the cat's out of the bag now, so why not just say it? But honestly, she could have played it differently, like Marty accused Evie of cheating, anything but outright confirming it to me. Maybe I'm overanalyzing this, but paying attention to how people speak is part of my job. And how Sarah said it, without hesitation, told me a lot. Evelyn, meanwhile, seemed to crumble under the weight of it all. She slumped on the couch, letting out this weird mix of a sob and a sigh. I wanted to press on, dive deeper, but I was too stunned. Did Sarah know? I asked, and she didn't respond. Instead, she just nodded, her hand still on her sister's shoulder. I didn't hesitate. I needed answers, so I asked the next logical question, how long? Her response came shockingly fast, 6 months. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I almost expected some kind of resistance, but there it was, plain as day. Evelyn's reaction mirrored my shock. She swatted her sister's hand away, and even Sarah seemed taken aback by how easily the truth came out. I leaned back, rubbing my face. Time to rip that Band-Aid off once and for all. We're not getting married. The looks I got from both sisters were priceless. They froze, like stunned goats, staring at me in disbelief. I repeated myself, louder this time, we're not getting married. I can't marry someone who would cover up adultery, especially not for 6 months. Sarah shot off the couch like a rocket, her arms outstretched, as if trying to wrap me up in her denial. You can't be serious. But I stood firm, my hands held up to keep her at a distance. I'm serious. I don't like any of this, and I can't marry you like this. It would be a mistake. And then, the floodgates opened. The tears, the accusations, the appeals to my sense of duty, the guilt-tripping. The loss of money, the embarrassment for all our friends, it was all coming at me in waves, but I had already thought through all of it. Hearing Sarah say it out loud, though, it felt different. Raw. Real. But in that moment, I probably made the biggest mistake of the night. In my frustration, I blurted out, look, I already canceled the honeymoon. It's not happening. And then, the bomb dropped. The moment Evelyn pieced it all together, she screamed, you son of a b, and flung herself at me like a wild animal. Now, I'm not a big guy, but I'm no pushover either. Yet, the sheer force with which she charged at me had me stumbling backward. I barely managed to raise my hands in time before her nails raked across my face. My phone nearly slipped from my grip as I pushed her away. Evelyn, get off me. Sarah, get your sister under control. I shouted, but Evelyn didn't back down. She lunged again, but Sarah, surprisingly, did exactly what I asked. She wrapped her arms around Evelyn and held her back. Get out of here now, or I'm calling the police. I threatened, phone in hand, ready to dial. Sarah, almost pleading, tried to calm the situation down, but I wasn't having it. I was done. She doesn't have anywhere to go, Sarah explained. Marty took her car keys. I didn't care. At this point, it didn't matter. I was done. I marched to my office, locked the door behind me, and called the police. I've been attacked by my fiancé's sister, I told them. I'm bleeding. My vision's blurry, and I'm afraid for my safety. I even told them I had the whole thing on video. Just as I finished talking to them, Sarah knocked on my door. She pleaded, please come out, we need to talk. But I wasn't interested. And soon enough, the police arrived. 2 officers, one young, one older, came into the house. I pointed straight at Evelyn and said, she attacked me. I offered them the video. The younger officer asked if I wanted to press charges, and when I said yes, he asked again. Yes, I said, standing my ground. I want to press charges. I have video evidence, and this is going to court. The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one hesitated, but I wasn't backing down. I'll call your boss if you don't do your job, I added, dropping a name I knew from my work. That seemed to do the trick. Evelyn was cuffed and dragged away, still screeching and crying like a madwoman. Sarah, of course, wasn't much better, repeating no, please over and over, like a broken record. One of the officers circled back and asked if everything was okay. I just nodded, ready to move on from the chaos. But Sarah was still a mess, and the officer could see it. When he kept asking her if everything was all right, I snapped. If you want to interrogate her, take it outside where my doorbell camera can't record it. I wasn't proud of how I acted, but at that moment, I was done with the situation. The older officer intervened before it could escalate further, and eventually, they left with Evelyn in tow. That night, I slept in the guest room, exhausted and emotionally drained. I barely slept, but it was better than facing Sarah. The next morning, I woke up at 11 a.m., and Sarah had somehow cleaned the entire house. The place looked immaculate, every corner spotless. She hovered near me, unsure of how to approach. I could tell she was wondering if this was all just a moment of rage, whether I'd changed my mind. I took a deep breath. We need to finish talking. And that was when the real conversation started. If only we had talked about this sooner, maybe things would have turned out differently. But then again, who's to say? 6 years. 6 long years of missed chances for a real conversation, and now everything's a mess. I guess there's no point in wondering about what could have been anymore. Anyway, for anyone still following this saga, expect a final chapter in a day or two, maybe a follow-up after August 10th. If things are still standing by then. I know this update is taking longer than I planned. It wasn't supposed to drag out this long, but life, as always, had other plans. So many things have been happening in the last few days, and until today, until I finally got a moment to myself after lunch, I just didn't have the time to sit down and get this out. But here I am, trying to get through as much as I can before the day runs out. There are a couple of things I need to clear up before diving into the update. I'll keep it brief, I promise. First, I don't know much about what's going on with Marty and his divorce, other than the fact that, to my knowledge, he's still in the middle of it. No papers yet, but the intention is clear. As for me, I'm not in a position to give him legal advice or tell him how to handle his situation. He's an adult, and he'll figure it out. My job as a friend is just to support him, that's it. Secondly, let's clear up the whole OnlyFans thing. If you thought this was some sort of guerrilla marketing, then I should have started with that from the first post, when it hit the front page of Reddit and was seen by over 3 million people. It's not. Honestly, though, considering how many people were reading this, it's no surprise that Mandy, who's been following the story, saw her name pop up. Could have been anyone, really. Just another Reddit user posting pictures. Speaking of Mandy, yes, we've talked. She was actually pretty helpful in confirming something for me, and she seems nice enough. But before anyone gets any funny ideas, there's no romance brewing here, okay? Mandy's happily married, been with her husband for almost 2 decades, and quite frankly, she's way too much for me to handle. Not my type. Now, let's get back to the real update. The last time I wrote, I thought my brother had used my office computer to chat with Mandy. It was too late for me to contact him that night, so I had to wait. I'm one of those people who can't leave a problem hanging, especially when it's in my face. I have to work on it, solve it, even if it drives me insane. And let me tell you, this was driving me mad. So I took a breath, stepped back, and decided to deal with it later. First on my list was informing everyone I had invited to the wedding that it was canceled. I'd already told my parents, and they contacted the relatives, but the rest? That was on me. Out of respect for them, I decided to call instead of text, but that was a huge mistake. Every call turned into an hour-long explanation about why the wedding was off. I could have just given a quick excuse, but I didn't want people thinking I was being ridiculous or had cold feet. I wanted to make sure they knew this wasn't some last-minute whim. It was important to me that they understood. By the time I finished contacting everyone, it was late, already morning in Australia. I'd been busy all day, but now I needed a break. So I made myself a sandwich and sat in the kitchen, trying to gather my thoughts. That's when I noticed Sarah wasn't home. No idea when she left. I sat down to eat, thinking about my brother, Carl. Carl's always been close to me. He's 13 years older, and growing up, he was like a second father to me. He always made time for me, even when he didn't have to. As a kid, I looked up to him so much. But now I was grappling with the fact that he might have been sexting with a woman who wasn't his wife, using my computer, in my house. I needed to figure out what to do about it, and fast. Talking to him seemed like the obvious thing to do. But considering how much of a mess my relationship with Sarah was, I wasn't sure if I cared about clearing my name anymore. Was there even anything left to salvage? Regardless, I knew I had to confront him. But the real question was, do I tell Karen, his wife? And if so, how would she react? After my sandwich, I logged into Facebook and video called Carl. He works from home, so it wasn't a surprise when he picked up right away. We exchanged some pleasantries, but I couldn't keep it light. I dove straight into it. Have you been using my computer to chat with women? His face froze. I watched him lean over, probably closing his office door. Yeah, I did, he admitted, like it was no big deal. I couldn't believe it. I swore under my breath, explaining how Sarah thought I was the one flirting with Mandy because, well, she'd seen the messages on my computer. And I wasn't happy about taking the blame for his mess. So I asked him, straight up, does Karen know about this? He hesitated, stumbling over his words, and then said, no, she didn't know. He'd prefer to keep it that way. Then, he opened up. His marriage had been rocky for years, especially in the bedroom. The youngest was 4 now, and things had been tense ever since. He explained how no matter what he did, helping around the house, caring for the kids, Karen was always too tired for anything. He started to develop performance anxiety, and the more he tried, the worse it got. So, he'd been spending his nights working in his office, which spiraled into an addiction to OnlyFans. I asked him if he was still doing it, and he swore he wasn't. I almost believed him, but something felt off. I hated that feeling. Why couldn't I trust my own brother? He'd always been the stand-up guy. Now I had a dilemma. If I wanted to clear my name, I'd have to get him to confess. But would that only cause more damage? If he came clean to Sarah, would she spitefully tell Karen? I wasn't sure what to do. So I urged him to talk to Karen and go to marriage counseling. To my surprise, he said they'd already been going for 6 months, and things were improving. Viagra helped. I couldn't believe it. I actually spit out my drink. But there it was. Carl was getting his marriage back on track, and I didn't want to ruin that. So, I decided to wait. I was going to see him in a couple of weeks, and once we were alone, I'd get to the bottom of it. That night, I went to bed early. I didn't see Sarah until the next morning. She looked drained, like she hadn't slept. I asked where she'd been, and she said she had to post bail for Evelyn. She'd gone to the courthouse, then drove Evelyn to her parents' house and spent the night. When I asked if her parents knew why the wedding was off, she snapped, "Of course they do." I tried to stay calm, but by now, I was losing it. I shot back, "Are you going to move back there, so they have both girls at home now?" It was petty, I know, but I was furious. She flinched, her eyes tearing up. That stung. But I didn't back down. We stood there, silent for a while, until she finally spoke up. "Our parents will be here at 3. I rolled my eyes. Not this again. But I knew I had to face them. We spent the next 3 hours negotiating wedding details, money, deposits, refunds. The whole thing was excruciating. My parents were supportive, but it was clear they thought this was insane, too. Still, they had my back. When it came to the house, though, that's when it got ugly. I suggested splitting the deposit, but Sarah wouldn't have it. She refused to move out. She threw a fit, and I realized I had made a mistake. I should have settled things with her first, before bringing up the house. It was too late for that, and she knew it. The tension was unbearable. The morning began with a sense of quiet urgency. I glanced over the first few pages of Sarah's letter, but the weight of it left me feeling overwhelmed. I pushed it aside, thinking I'd deal with it later, and went on to work. When I left, Sarah was still in bed. She must have stayed up late writing that letter. I couldn't help but wonder what had kept her awake. Was it the weight of her thoughts or the guilt of things unsaid? At the office, I dove into the day's tasks, rescheduling meetings, making calls to venues and vendors. Some things were being handled by Sarah or her parents, but the rest fell to me. The catering company, for instance, was a nightmare. They insisted I pay most of their fees, claiming they'd already ordered the food. The idea of paying for weeks-old steak? Ridiculous. I fired back, but my complaints were met with stone-cold indifference. It was clear they were only interested in getting as much money out of me as possible. Then there was the DJ. What a contrast. The guy was incredibly kind and even refunded nearly all the money we had paid him. Though it wasn't much, it was a small consolation in a day filled with frustration. As the hours wore on, between work calls and trying to salvage what I could, I finally read Sarah's letter. All 20 pages of it. To sum it up, Sarah revealed something that had been simmering beneath the surface of our entire relationship. Since childhood, she'd been bullied by Evelyn. The letter exposed the heart of her coping mechanism, to please others, especially Evelyn. It was easier to give in than to risk causing conflict. She admitted that this behavior had seeped into every aspect of her life, making her hesitant to speak up, to assert herself, or even to voice an opinion. Reading this, I paused. Looking back, I could see it in our relationship too. Sarah had always been, well, perfect. She never disagreed with me, never prioritized her own plans over mine. She was always there, always accommodating, almost like a puppet performing her role. I couldn't recall a single argument in 6 years. No heated debates. No clashes of opinion. It sounded ideal at first, right? But it was an illusion. I realized something unsettling. Despite knowing Sarah for 6 years, I didn't truly know her. It was as if she'd been wearing a mask, reflecting whatever others wanted to see. In our case, she had become the embodiment of the perfect girlfriend, hiding her true self beneath the surface. Even the text messages, the ones that had shattered my trust, didn't feel like they were from her. They were just another reflection, shaped by Evelyn's influence, her faults, and her insecurities. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I was in a relationship with a woman who wasn't fully herself, a woman so desperate to please that she had lost touch with who she was beneath the act. Was it possible that I only loved her for the version of herself she reflected back at me? Was it all just a projection? It was a strange thought, almost too abstract to fully grasp. As I considered this, I realized I was looking at our relationship through a new lens. It was no longer just about love. It was about fear, insecurity, and the desperate need for approval. Sarah needed help. I saw that clearly now. She was an adult, yet she was stuck in a pattern of appeasing others, too afraid to stand up for herself. She was, in many ways, still acting like a child, constantly trying to avoid confrontation or rejection. That night, after we talked more about her childhood and her struggles, I knew what I had to do. It was painful, but I felt more certain than ever that calling off the wedding was the right decision. I could no longer ignore the signs. The more I learned about Sarah, the more I realized how deep her issues ran, and how much work it would take for her to face them. The night after our conversation, I went to bed feeling less anxious. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, but there was still a long road ahead. The next morning, I updated everyone on my situation, well, to the extent I could. There was so much to process. The chaos of the past week had left me drained, and now, it felt like I was just waiting for the dust to settle. As for Sarah and me, we were still in limbo, but there was a sense of a plan forming. We hadn't closed the door on the relationship completely, but we were far from the engaged couple we once were. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I was starting to understand Sarah a lot better now. It was as if the veil had been lifted, and for the first time, I could see the real her. But it wasn't all wrapped up in neat little bows. The truth was, even though I was angry, disappointed, and hurt by Sarah's actions, I still saw a glimmer of hope. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she was trying. She was acknowledging her flaws, seeking help. That counted for something. And so, for now, the story wasn't over. It was a chapter, not the end of the book. There were still questions, still a lot of uncertainty. But I wasn't willing to completely close the door just yet. Not while there was a chance to understand, to heal, and perhaps, to rebuild something that could be real this time. I am paying back her equity in the house in fortnightly installments from my pay until we're all caught up, which will help her defray the costs of getting her own apartment. It's definitely not ideal, but we're not together anymore. Sarah really didn't want to accept this at first, and I can totally understand where she's coming from. It's tough. I feel for her. But, at the same time, if she really has the emotional struggles I think she does, then maybe pushing this issue could finally light a fire under her to seek the real help she needs. Just forgiving her, though, would be sweeping everything under the rug, and that would be a disaster for our relationship in the long run. I really wish she had opened up to me sooner before everything blew up. I would have much rather faced this as a loving partner and supported her through it all. But she didn't give me that chance, and that's a shame. So, here I am. This is the best I can do at this point. The situation with Sarah? It's pretty much a wait-and-see situation. Who knows? Maybe one or both of us will get tired of this, and we'll just throw in the towel and move on completely. Honestly, it could very well be me, but right now, I'm not interested in complicating my life further by being with anyone else. It's just not on my radar. I think we're looking at a few months down the line before we get any kind of firm resolution, and I'm okay with that. Not everything needs to happen at lightning speed, especially when it's emotional. Financially, I'm fine. We're separated, we're not living together, and I'm cautiously cynical about the whole situation. But I'm also not kidding myself. If at any point I feel like Sarah's issues are too big to overcome or that rebuilding trust is impossible, I'll walk. I have no interest in prolonging something that I see as hopeless. But here's the thing, I don't think it's hopeless. It's just going to be difficult. And I'm open to waiting a little while to see how it plays out. To help process everything that's happened recently, I'm even seeking my own counselor. I need to get through the emotional roller coaster of these last few weeks, and I need help understanding how Sarah and I interacted during all this. Honestly, I believed I was deceived by her, but looking back, I realized that it was a bit of self-deception on my part too. Who wouldn't love a girlfriend who always agrees with you, who bends over backwards to make sure you're happy before she's even concerned about herself? But here's the dilemma I'm struggling with, and maybe Sarah is too. How much of her affection was genuine love for me, and how much of it was just her deeply ingrained need to please people because of her fear of rejection and anxiety? That's the million-dollar question. Once we figure that out, we'll have our answer about Sarah and me. I know this isn't the update everyone wanted, but it's all I've got. Maybe check back in a few months, see how it all played out. I appreciate the messages of support from those of you who've reached out. For the rest of you, well, laugh it off. Life's too short. Back in early December, it was almost 2 months ago that I made my first post about Sarah reaching out to me for help. The situation with her family, especially with Marty, had gotten so complicated. I think some people offered solid advice, and it helped me get my thoughts straight. Honestly, I probably overblamed Sarah for the whole situation, and my mistrust of her intentions was probably exaggerated. But when I really thought about it, I realized something important. Not everything in Sarah's life revolves around me or our relationship. I had assumed she was acting in bad faith, trying to use me, but she wasn't. She had a huge personal issue with her sister and felt awful about how the whole mess had affected her niece. She wasn't reaching out to me for some self-serving reason. She needed advice. She needed help. I could see that now, and it made me realize that maybe I needed to chill out with my paranoia. It's a hard lesson to learn, but sometimes, living in the past can rob you of positive feelings in the present. As for Marty, well, Sarah had warned me about her family's plans to falsely accuse him of child abuse. When I heard that, I was dead set on telling him everything, even if Sarah didn't want me to. I tried one last time to convince her to be the one to reach out to Marty. I thought it might help repair some of the rift between her and her brother-in-law and help her own healing process too. But I knew why she couldn't do it. Her parents were in on the plot, and she wasn't strong enough to face the fallout from them, especially after her whole life of being bullied by them. So, I made a promise to her. If it came to that, I'd help her get a place to stay. Eventually, she and Marty met, and I wasn't there, but I know it went down at his parents' house. They knew about Sarah's role in covering for Evelyn's infidelity, and there were some harsh words. Sarah told Marty everything, and then they called his lawyer. It was over in a blink. But here's the thing Sarah said, she was grateful that Marty allowed her to spend time with her niece. He didn't have to, but it meant a lot to her. There was such a sadness in her voice when she told me. And for a moment, I thought, maybe she's been carrying a heavier burden than I realized. Weeks went by, and my offer to help Sarah didn't come into play. She found her own apartment. I even accelerated the repayment of the money I owed her to help speed up the process. Then, after she moved out, Evelyn made her move. The accusations she leveled against Marty were vile. I couldn't believe it. I never thought Evelyn would stoop that low. Not even her parents, who went along with it, seemed that cruel. But as you can imagine, it triggered an emergency child custody hearing. During that hearing, Marty's lawyer presented an affidavit from Sarah detailing the plot, along with a recorded interview. I wish I could say Evelyn got her just desserts, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. She has some charges against her, but it's doubtful she'll face anything significant. Prisons aren't full of bitter ex-spouses, right? But the custody hearing didn't go in Evelyn's favor. Marty got primary custody of their child, and Evelyn will have a court-appointed observer during her visits. The divorce is likely to be finalized soon, and I think that last stunt drained a lot of Evelyn's power to make the divorce messy. Now, Sarah's persona non grata with her family, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But even though she's been treated terribly by them her whole life, I can see that it still stings to have contact severed. She jokes about it, but I know it hurts. And here's something crazy. Out of the blue, I offered for Sarah to use my parents' airline miles to come with me to Australia to visit my brother and his family. I honestly didn't think she'd say yes, especially since she's a teacher and it's not her break. But she surprised me. So now we're in Australia, at my brother's big property in semi-rural Queensland. We spent Christmas Day surfing, and Sarah and I stayed in separate accommodations, but we're still sort of navigating things. I'm not sure where it's headed, but I can't deny that I'm feeling a bit better about everything. The one thing I know for sure is that I'm not rushing back into a marriage, at least not right now. Seeing all the drama in the last half year has left a bad taste in my mouth. So, whatever future Sarah and I have together, we'll need to be on the same page. I don't want to waste her time or lead her on. Time will tell, I guess. And finally, thanks to the few who are still invested in this messy life of mine. If anything else happens, I'll post it here. It's been quite the ride, and the support I've gotten from the Reddit community has been incredible. Thanks again. Oh, and just today, Sarah told me something I didn't know that's pretty important. Marty's lawyer didn't just present her testimony, they had their kid screened by 2 psychologists. During the process, the kid revealed that she'd seen Evelyn and an affair partner in the act multiple times. Her mom had been bribing her with ice cream to keep quiet. When I heard that, I was floored. No one deserves a mother like that. It explains why Evelyn only gets supervised visitation now. It's heartbreaking. As for Evelyn, I think she's in for a world of hurt. And I'm honestly surprised her parents haven't kicked her out by now.